Max, we have mentioned several times, we've used the analogy that we have gone through the looking glass. We went through the looking glass when interest rates went negative on $15 trillion in sovereign bonds in Europe. Now remember, when Alice went through the looking glass, the Red Queen explained to Alice that now here, on the other side of the looking glass, it takes all the running you can do to stay in the same place. So everywhere we look in this modern fiat economy, where we went through the looking glass first in 1971, of course, when we went off the gold standard. And this is why we're having to run faster and faster to stay in the same place. Everywhere you look, whether it's in fracking, where we have to drill more and more holes to keep production flat. Student debt, if you think about that, in order to stay flat for your household income, you have to get more and more education, more and more diplomas, more and more degrees just to stay even. Well, Fed trapped in a rate cutting box. It's the debt, stupid. This is a chart from mishtalk.com, and it just shows dramatically the Red Queen syndrome. The red line is GDP and the blue line is debt. So we're having to accumulate more and more debt just to stay flat since the 1970s.
And then during this explosion of derivatives around the world, it went below 0%. So no bank in the world actually has any assets at all. They're all insolvent. We saw that in 2008, where the Ponzi scheme came to a screeching halt, and suddenly you had the folks in Washington, Tim Geithner and Ben Bernanke and those guys, they had to print what turned out to be $17 trillion to keep the banks from having to declare the fact that their fractional reserve banking had taken them way, 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 way underneath zero, and that they were in fact insolvent. And today, this Red Queen syndrome has brought us negative interest rates that are the definition of economic insanity. It's negative incentive, but that's what's required just to save the banks the embarrassment of having to publicly say, you know what, we're insolvent.
It's not just the banks, Max. It's the entire fabric of the entire economy. Every single thing about the economy. Fracking has nothing to do with banking other than the fact that there are investors willing to lend to them. They do produce oil. In fact, they did have another record amount of production. They lost money on every single barrel they produced, but they're still producing. So that is an actual real economic activity where you're having, actual capital expenditure, you have equipment, you have men drilling, you have all this stuff going on, and it's still like a Red Queen syndrome. Now, I want to show you this fact that we have to keep on producing more and more debt. What happens about that, because it takes more and more debt to go up. But when you start to even go down a little bit because of that leverage, you see that's the little tiny blip there from the 2008-2009 crash. Remember how little that decline in debt looks on this chart, and it caused near chaos. Because in 1984, it took $1 of additional debt to create an additional $1 of real GDP. That was 1984, when you were just starting out on Wall Street just a year earlier or so. As of the fourth quarter of 2018, it took $3.8 of debt to create $1 of real GDP.